Hi, it's Katie.
And Katie, and you are listening to ProperTea, the podcast where we spill the tea on Toronto real estate.
Let's get started. Hello.
Hi guys. So we realized that we've been saying welcome to ProperTea at the beginning of every episode, even though we have like a introduction, an automatic intro that says welcome to ProperTea. Let's get started.
We're gonna stop double introducing you, and we're just gonna get into it.
Yeah. So what are we talking about today?
Renting.
Woo! Something that applies to like probably more than 50% of the population of Toronto at this point, I would say.
That's a good question. I actually don't know. That's a good...
I'm gonna stick with my over 50% because that's nice and vague, and I feel pretty confident about it. Yeah, we've talked a lot about home buying in particular up until this point, and we just wanted to let you know that we didn't forget.
Rentals are a thing too.
Yeah,
you have a lot of rights.
Rentals are a thing.
There's a lot of laws around you, and it's a
lot. It's a lot. It's confusing, and it can be overwhelming. So we wanted to talk about that. Little caveat: we're going to talk about renting in normal times for right now, not the COVID times. A lot of it is overlapping. There's a couple things that are obvious caveats for COVID. Some things have changed, and we will. Asterisks is really fucking hard to say.
Yeah, that's not an easy. You have to have your mouth really warmed up to get that one out, which we again didn't do.
Yeah, we never do it. No. But regardless, we will talk about that at some point. We're just, for now, we're going to focus on the regular rules because it's nice to have hope to go back to normal, you know?
Yeah. But we will do a little sidebar episode about renting in COVID times because there are a few things that are different that you should be aware of. For example, rental discounts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we will get into that. Never fear.
But today we're going to talk about what will happen once everyone has a vaccine.
Anyway. So renting, private versus professional. Let's not talk about triggering controversial topics.
Yay. Woo. So yeah, what is that? What's private versus professional?
What is the private versus professional market? Right. Okay. So basically you find rentals in two different places. Well, multiple different places, but two different categories of places. One would be like Kijiji, Craigslist, maybe viewit.ca, Padmapper. These are the sites that are available in Toronto. I assume nationally. I also assume wherever you live, there will probably be some local sites as well. Yeah, so lots of websites that are available for you guys to use rentals. The other place that you would find them is on the professional market. So people who are working with real estate agents. So private is Kijiji, Craigslist, Padmapper, Viewit, etc., etc. Professional is anybody who is working with a real estate agent. So
that's things that have actually been listed on the MLS, and there's like a whole bunch of different websites that pull that information as well. But regardless, if it's been listed on the MLS, you need a real estate agent to see it and to rent it.
Yep. You do. Correct.
So, you know, I'm a renter. I've only ever rented. And my experience with renting has been pretty limited to websites like Craigslist and Kijiji, etc. That's where I found all my apartments, except for the one that I'm currently living in, which I found through a friend.
Which just happened, actually.
Which just happened, and sometimes it's just a beautiful thing. But yeah, so it never occurred to me to work with a real estate agent for rentals, mostly because like I don't have the money, I thought, to pay for like a professional service looking for a rental, and I had these other options available to me.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think that they can use real estate agents or don't realize that they can use real estate agents to help them find rentals, which is a shame, honestly, because a lot of y'all are busy and we make your lives a lot easier. And if you are a tenant, it's actually free.
Yeah, so that's the thing I found out and was like, what? are you fucking kidding me this whole time? And that's also, it's a bit of a confusing statement, because I'm sure you're like, how could it be free for me? If you're getting paid, you
Yeah,
have to
we
get
still get
paid
paid.
somewhere.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
It actually works the same way it does if you were to purchase a property. So what happens is the listing side, so the landlord has signed a contract to list their home on the MLS, and they've agreed to pay the listing brokerage a certain percentage of rent, a certain amount of money per for a commission, basically. Usually for a rental, it's 1 month's rent plus HST. Um, then the contract then goes on to state that I'm going to pay you 1 month's rent plus HST, that you then split between whoever brings the
Tenant.
tenant. Yeah. So
Yeah.
whoever represents the tenant will get paid out of this commission that I'm agreeing to pay you. Basically, you have to split it 50-50. Well,
And
not 50-50, usually 50-50, but that's
hopefully
another
50-50.
that's another conversation for another time.
But the point is, though, that so essentially, I mean, anybody who's ever rented an apartment knows that when you find the place and you sign your lease, you're also putting down a deposit for the first and last month's rent. Like, that's something that you have to do to rent an apartment, no matter what, whether you're working with a realtor or not. If you are working with a realtor, their commission is coming out of the deposit that you would pay either way.
Yeah.
And the nice thing too is that when you pay that first and last month's rent, what it means is that you, as the tenant, are not your last month's rent is paid for regardless of whether or not it's going towards commission for agents. So that
Yeah.
money is yours. You did it. You did what you had to do. The landlord has made an agreement to say that one of those months' rents he's going to pay agents for.
Yeah,
Am I
and
right?
let's be yeah, I want to be like super extra, like really crystal clear on this. So the way that it works is, and we're definitely jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit, but the way that it works is when you find a place, you have to pay a quote unquote deposit. It's not actually okay, you have to pay first and last month's rent upfront, basically. So it's first month's rent upfront and the last month's as a deposit. That's like legally the way that the wording is. So if you were renting on the private market, you would be giving your landlord directly 2 months rent. So 1 month rent up front and then the last month rent that the landlord holds on to. First month's paid, the last month's held on to the last month. If you are renting on the professional market, you do the exact same thing. You write a check for the first and the last month's rent, but instead of it going to the um, landlord
Landlord.
directly, it goes into the real estate brokerage's trust account. So if you rent something, say like on the 15th of November, and your lease starts is December 1st, it goes into the real estate brokerage's trust account for those 15 days. Basically, we like hold it for everybody, and then on the 1st, the amount, the 2 months rent goes to the um landlord, and the commission just gets deducted out of it for ease, basically. If the landlord has a separate agreement to say like, hey, I'm gonna like pay you the 1 month's rent plus HST, whatever, like that's up to brokerages. I don't know if that's actually possible. I've never seen it. It's just easier for the landlords to say, I'm gonna like take it out of kind of the deposit, but it's it makes absolutely no difference to the tenant. The tenant pays first and last month's rent, and that's all you need to know, basically. Like
Yeah.
the landlord then pays the commissions out of whatever money they have, but
Yeah, I guess,
yeah.
yeah, the thing I wanted to make clear is that the fact that your first and last month's rent deposit, half of it ends up getting used to pay the commissions, doesn't mean that you then have to pay your last month's rent again.
Yeah,
You're
no,
still,
exactly.
you have still paid your part.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So you
as a
pay first,
tenant,
yeah, as a tenant, you pay first and last month's rent, and you are golden. However,
yeah,
that money gets divided,
is not your problem.
is not your problem. Basically. Exactly.
So that's exciting because it means that I think for a lot of people who don't know that, it opens up a whole lot of new possibilities, because renting is at like looking for a place to live as a renter is really just as stressful a process as looking for a place to live as a buyer. Like, you're still looking
Yeah,
for a
totally.
place to live.
Mhm.
And there's competition for that, and maybe your perfect place is like a unicorn and somebody else is about to scoop it up, and that's terrifying. And I mean, one of the things that I think is quite helpful, having watched now over the last number of months how Katie does rentals. Uh, when you start working with an agent, most of the time, I think a really good agent, they will have you. You're welcome. They'll have you pull all your documents together first. And when I say documents, what I mean is there are certain things that a landlord is going to need to see. We're kind of regardless of whether you're on the private or professional market before they accept you as a tenant. Things
Exactly.
like an employment letter, your credit report.
Quick
Pause.
time out for 1 second. Going back to the private and the professional market, real estate agents are able to help you obviously with the professional market. Listings are listed, like units are listed with agents, tenants are represented by agents. We can still help you with the private market. It's a little bit different. So just like a 30-second elevator pitch on that is basically the private market is either the landlord renting the unit, the home themselves, or it being like a purpose-built apartment rental, in which case they have their own rental processes. Agents can help you with that, but you may end up paying commission out of pocket in that case, or if the landlord agrees to pay the commission directly to the listing agent and to the agent that's helping you, that's fantastic. But if you are working on the private market, you're either going to be working on your own, or there's a very real possibility that you're going to be paying commission out of pocket. So if you're working with a real estate agent, you'll be directed to listings that are on the professional market. You're still free to look at listings that are on the private market, and then we basically have a conversation about how to proceed from there, kind of thing. You should know what the difference is in advance, and you should know that just because you are working with a real estate agent doesn't mean that you can't look at the private market. It just means that either one, you have to have a conversation with the landlord in advance to see if they will pay the commission, or two, you may have to pay it out of pocket. So the majority of time, if you're working with a real estate agent, we'll just direct you to the professional, as I said, but just know that that's a thing. Going forward in this conversation and for this episode, we're going to be talking about working on the professional market. So working with real estate agents. So landlords who have listed their properties with real estate agents and tenants who are working with real estate agents, because I don't work very much with the private market, to be totally honest. And it has its own things. So
Yeah.
we're going to stick with our experience.
Absolutely. I apologize.
No,
And
it's like, honestly, it's a good point of clarification to make, because a lot of people don't realize that. And a lot of people, honestly, who even are working with real estate agents don't necessarily know that they can still continue to look at the private market, or B, if they are still looking at the private market, what happens. So
yeah.
just know the information, be transparent about it up front. If you do still want to look at Kijiji and Craigslist, that's fine. Just let me know.
Yeah, and I'll also say that oftentimes, more often than you realize, if you aren't working with an agent and don't have access to the professional market, a number of the units that you see on Craigslist and Kijiji are also listed on the MLS.
Yeah, actually, that's true.
Um,
That's a good point, because now that I think about it, the Treb has an agreement with Kijiji, so all of our listings push to Kijiji.
there you go.
There you go. Totally
So
forgot
it's
about that.
and if that's the case, then that landlord is already going to be prepared to pay commission for a
Exactly.
professional listing anyway. So there's a total possibility, as long as you understand what you're getting into, that the place that you find on the private market with your real estate agent is still going to work out where you're not paying commission for them, the landlord will. So yeah, it's just something to know, and just something to be totally aware of all the different things that can happen with.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say, like, tenants paying commission to real estate agents probably happens like 0.25% of the time. Like, it's a
yeah,
rare situation. So not to worry about it overall, but just
just know.
information is power. Knowledge is
Yeah.
power. So there you
Absolutely.
go.
And going back to what I was saying before, because this is still true, whether you're on the private or professional market, regardless of whether you're working with a realtor or not, the landlord is going to require certain documents from you before you can sign a lease, or they should. And if you're
Correct.
working with a landlord who doesn't require documents from you, that's a bit of a red flag.
Yep.
So documents that are required, regardless, are things like your employment letter, your credit report, a pay stub, maybe if you're a student, a letter from your school. If you're oftentimes with students, you need a guarantor. So information from your guarantor and your guarantor's credit report.
Mhm.
Um,
Let's talk
things
about
like
credit reports
this.
for 1 second.
Yeah,
I actually want to
happily.
make I want to talk about credit reports, and I also want to make a note on employment letters. Credit reports are a pain in the ass. I have a lot of thoughts on the credit industry, but anyway, that's a sidebar episode. Um, for the most part, landlords want to see Equifax or TransUnion credit reports. Okay. I know there's a lot of other places out there, websites out there, Credit Karma, um, what's that other one? Borrowwell. There's a few.
I don't know.
Honestly, like just get the Equifax report. It's in everybody's best interest. Send the PDF. Don't send me JPEGs or screenshots of it. That's sketchy, folks. Please know that we have ways of checking to make sure that if you have doctored these documents as well. I know the majority of people don't do this, but
But
just
it happens more than you think it
it does
does. Like
happen
I
more
have
than you think it
seen
does.
it multiple times.
There's one agent in particular in our office who's posted several times recently, like within the last couple of months, of like several documents that she's been working with tenants that have been she's noticed have been altered. I don't know if she was working on the tenant or the landlord side, to be honest, but honestly, great catch.
Yeah,
And we have ways of checking those documents to make sure that they are
legit.
legit and haven't been tampered with, just so everybody knows. Um,
I
yeah,
also I have something else that I want to throw out as well too. Like Katie said, they want Equifax or TransUnion. Um, go for Equifax for a lot of reasons, but another one that actually just happened to like me and my partner personally, that is something that people don't know. TransUnion, if you sign up to get a credit report, because you have to pay for it, it's like $15 or something. It's
nope.
not.
It is not $15. It is $30. If you get the
Ooh,
$15, yep, sorry. It's like 24 or $29 or something like that. If you get the $15 report, it will not have your score on it. It will only be the report. And for rental
what?
purposes, yeah, it's stupid. For rental purposes, I need the one and everybody else needs the one with your score
Score.
and your report. Okay?
That
So,
makes sense. So okay, so
guys,
get the $30
get the
one
$30
regardless.
report.
But TransUnion also apparently once you sign up to pay for a one-time thing, they will automatically, without telling you, sign you up for a credit report monthly that then comes out of your credit card. And like actually this happened, and like my partner checked because we when we went to get our pre-approval, we had to get a credit report. And again, like the only ones that were trusted were Equifax or TransUnion. And he just kind of on a whim did TransUnion instead of Equifax. I don't think he really thought about it. Um, and he ended up noticing that they were continuing to charge him. Like he called and explained that that was bullshit and they refunded him, which is great. But like, you don't want to have to go through that. And also, you don't want to have to realize 6 months later that $30 is coming out of your account every month for a credit report that you don't need and didn't plan to pay for. So just
Yeah.
FYI,
And
pro
I do
tip.
I do know that Equifax also has an option where you can like pay, like have like some sort of monthly subscription. I don't know if it's monitoring or what it is. But yeah, so just, when you're signing up for those, be careful that you're paying for the one-time report. Um, and make sure that you get the one with the score and the report. The other thing to know about credit reports is that they're usually only good for about 30 days. So if you are 3 months out from buying or from renting your property, hold off on pulling your credit report, please and thank you. You can actually still check your score. On a lot of online banking platforms right now have like credit score or credit report portals. Um, So far, I have not been successful at figuring out how to actually download like a report for from there. So I still have to like pay for it if I would like have to like send it anywhere, which is kind of annoying. But um,
Regardless.
regardless, make sure you're double checking the products that you're buying. You want the one that's the score and the report, and you do not need the monthly subscription, but hold off to only 30 days.
And this has been our TED Talk on credit
And
reports.
this
Thank
is
you for
our TED
coming.
Talk on credit reports.
Yeah,
the other note that
so
I wanted to say about employment letters is, and I mean, this kind of goes for all of your documents, but specifically for employment letters, because everything else you can get pretty much instantly. Employment letters sometimes take a couple of days. Get all of those documents before you start looking, because you do not want to lose a property that you love because you were waiting for an employment letter and somebody scooped it up underneath you. Like,
and they had
honestly,
all their documents ready, because that
because
happens.
that happens all the time. The other thing too is like sometimes, not in COVID times, you may get into multiple offers on rentals. That happened on 2 years in 2018.
18?
It must have been every single lease. I did over 30 leases that year, and every single one of them, I got into multiple offers. It
Yeah,
was,
and which is and that's also a nightmare. And like, and that also, for the record, that happens on the private market too.
yep, that happens on the private market too, for sure.
Constantly. Like, and when we were looking for to move out of our like 450 square foot basement apartment 3 years ago, and we had like a really set budget. We couldn't go over it. There were only we were looking on the private market. There were only so many places that were within our budget that were livable. And every single time we went to go, it was a line around the fucking block.
Yeah.
Around the block for people to get in. And all we had to do was look at it and be like, well, that's it, because people are going to be willing to offer more than what they're asking. And we're not going to be able to get the place because it's the top end of our budget and we can't go higher than that. So
and those lineups are so discouraging too, because to be totally honest, before I got my real estate license, I also rented on the private market. So honestly, nothing wrong with it, guys, but just know the difference.
Yeah, just know your
and yeah, those lines are so discouraging, because like you're like, shit, like and landlords, I don't know if they do it intentionally, but they certainly are like, I don't want to come to this place 50,000 times to show this. I'm going to schedule all of the showings for one time.
Yeah, or
So
it's just an open house. That's the only opportunity that you have to go see it.
yeah, so it totally makes sense from like their time and scheduling perspectives, but like from a tenant's perspective, it's so shitty to stand in those lines, because like you see how many other people you're potentially competing with, and like, yeah, that unit's not going to be right for everybody, but like, you're likely going to be in competition with somebody else there, and that's a bummer. So
Yeah, especially if you are on a limited budget and there's only so many places that work within that. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
it's
Because then
very
you're really
stressful.
fucked. You're really fucked if you finally find a place. You're so excited to see it. You get there, there's a line around the block, and it's just your heart drops, and you know immediately that it's gone, because somebody's going to be able to offer 1700 when you can only offer 1600 top end, and who's not going to take that offer when it's
Yeah.
more than what they were asking for. It's
Yeah.
just it can be really depressing and discouraging. So
Yeah, and that
have
happens
your
on
documents ready.
so have your documents ready, have as much prepared at the front end as you possibly can, so that you look as good as you possibly can. The other thing that I like to do when I'm presenting an offer to landlords, or it's to the listing agent, because landlords are represented by agents and everything goes through the agents, I like to suggest a meeting. And
Yeah.
like,
And
honestly, even if you have a one-time meeting, like, you never I know it's kind of hard to judge, but like, there are some red flags. Like, if somebody's agreeing to those types of meetings, I think it's already a step in the right direction, because
yeah.
first of all, not everybody's offering them, but also not everybody's obviously accepting them. Like, I offer them every single time, and it's maybe 5% of the time that people are like, oh yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. And
People were doing it more before COVID, but like, even now, like, virtual meetings, guys, like, they're easier.
they are. It's And it's, I mean, we've talked about this like endlessly when we talk about like, finding your real estate agent and making sure that you guys jive and that you have you'll be able to have a good, solid working relationship, and that the interview is going both ways, that the agent is testing you out and you're testing them out. But like, it's really the same thing with landlords and tenants, and that relationship lasts potentially
Way
quite a bit
longer.
longer. So, having,
Well, no, actually, not necessarily, because to be
it
honest,
depends.
I've had a lot of repeat clients, and some of them have ended up buying. So
That's true. That's
my
true. But I
relationships
mean
have
more like,
lasted out longer than our landlords' relationships. Wahaha. I
but
don't know why I'm wahaha on
consistency
that.
wise, like yes, that's true. But there may be months at a time that go when you don't hear from
Oh
them
yeah,
because
no,
they're
for
happy
sure.
in their
Yeah,
place
no.
versus your landlord is somebody you're going to have to deal with every month.
Um,
Absolutely. Get your documents together
it's your
ahead
docs.
of time.
Yeah.
Um,
Go
and
go into your search prepared, because it'll make
yeah,
everybody's life a lot easier, and it will help you get the unit that you want quickly, with no stress. Everything will just flow, and
excuse me.
24 hours, 48 hours later, you'll have a unit, and you'll be like, whoa, that was easy, amazing, woohoo, love
That
it.
was yeah. So yeah, documents are huge and they're necessary for both the public, or sorry, professional and private markets. I'm gonna keep doing that. I apologize. It's really hard to keep all the P's straight in my head,
I know. Yeah.
which is gross. Now that I anyway,
The other document that you're going to need on actually both the professional and the private market is the Ontario Standard Lease Agreement, henceforth known as the OSL.
because our mouths are tired.
Yeah, sometimes referred to as the RTA, but that also refers to the Residential Tenancies Act.
Yeah, so we're gonna call it the OSL, the Ontario Standard Lease.
Yeah.
You will have to sign a lease whether you use a realtor or not. This
Yes.
is just a fact.
Yeah. So 2 years ago, 3 years, I think it was 2 years ago. That sounds right. For several probably valid reasons, but none that I really know of. The Ontario government introduced the Ontario Standard Lease. It's a mandatory document for all rentals across Ontario. Tenants have to or can request it from the landlords. Landlords have to provide it within 21 days, or like major consequences, i.e., like tenants don't have to pay rent kind of consequences. Your eyes just went wide and you were like, what?
Yeah, that's crazy.
But it's any lease signed after this date. So like if you've been living in your property for the last 5 years, you can't just be like, oh shit, request this document and not pay rent. No, that's not how it works. So you're going to sign the Ontario Standard Lease Agreement. Basically what it is, it's like a 15 page document. It's 14 pages. That the first 7 pages are all of the details of the lease that you probably already signed and agreed to, especially if you're working with a real estate agent. So it'll have your name, the landlord's name, the address, the term. So for how long you're going to be living in the unit. Usually it's a 1-year term. We'll talk about that in a hot second. Anything that's included. So parking, lockers, anything like that. It'll give you a breakdown of utilities. If there's any other additional terms like smoking rules, condo bylaws, they talk about those. Deposits, what happens there. Basically, it gives you like an overview of your entire lease. And then the last 7 pages are very easy to explain, or very easy to understand explanations of all of the things that you just signed. Your rights, your landlord's rights, what happens in what situations, what your landlords can and can't ask for in terms of like deposits and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And it also it's a long document, and like always with long documents like that, it's if you're
Right.
like, well, I'm gonna have to sign this either way, I don't really want to read it. I completely understand that. I would say this is one of those times where you should just read through it. Just read through it. Also because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that there's so much really, really helpful information in there. And like Katie said, it really is explained in a way that's understandable. But like, I mean, it's
And it's not so long. Like we say it's 14 pages, but like it's not going to take you like 2 hours to read or anything like that.
no,
Like,
it'll
take
take
like
you a half hour tops.
if you're a slow reader.
Yeah, well, everybody's different.
True.
We're inclusive.
No judgment. No judgment.
No judgment. But yeah, so there's stuff in there about, I mean, and it's everything too about from like, you know, when a rent increase can happen and why, when a rent decrease can happen and why, what happens when,
Which we'll talk
uh,
about.
yeah, what happens when you, when the landlord wants you to leave, which is an eviction, what happens when a tenant wants to leave before the term is up, how to handle it if a landlord and a tenant come to a mutual agreement about leaving before a term is up, what dates, like what is the amount of notice that you have to give if you're renewing or not renewing your lease, what is the amount of notice they have to give if they don't want you to renew your lease, or if they want to, or if there's going to be a price increase, um, and also all sorts of recourse in situations where something has gone wrong. And what's helpful about that too, is that, and again, this is like, I mean, obviously we're slightly plugging for you to work with a realtor because Katie is a realtor. But I will say this,
But
which
hang
is
on, we're not plugging to work with me. We're just plugging to work with some
with a
a
realtor. Yes,
professional.
exactly, a professional. But I mean, I will say this, which is,
But I mean, hey, work with me if you want to continue.
yeah, absolutely. There's stuff in there that, like, there's the landlord tenant board, which is actually one of the social justice tribunals of Ontario, and it's where like all of these things, any kind of disputes or anything like that get taken to, and also who writes the rules on this and is the governing board. There are all sorts of things that, like, as a tenant, and that's the perspective I'm going to speak from because that's all I've ever been, there are a lot of things that people are not allowed to slip into your lease, or that like aren't legal unless you sign your name to them. And if you don't know
Hang on.
what,
I'm going to let you continue, but I might correct you. Continue.
that's fine. But like if you don't know that you're, on an amendment to your Ontario standard lease, which happens all the time because like there's something specific about the apartment and you guys need to state it in advance and agree to it together before everything gets signed and becomes official. But there are things that get slipped in there that aren't chill, that you might not know aren't chill. And if you have a real estate agent reading these, somebody who does this every day and knows exactly what the rules are, what's allowed and what isn't, you know, will walk away with a safer, better situation, I think, than if you're working on your own. You don't know the rules, you don't know what's allowed and what isn't allowed, or I guess
It's a lot. It
allowed
would
and
be a lot of research for you to figure it out yourself, which you can do if you want, and the information is definitely there. But it's a lot easier for you to have somebody who is very experienced in this type of area just explain this to you easily and in a way that you can understand and ask questions.
yeah, and sometimes it's as simple as changing a single word in a clause,
Yeah.
like that. It's stuff like that. It's the things
Yeah.
that you just wouldn't know to look for. And again, you're like, the rental situation, it's a little bit different now than it has been in the past. But if you
Yeah.
found a place and you are desperate to get in there because it's everything you ever wanted and you're worried that you're going to lose it, like you're not going to go out of your way to argue with a landlord that's put in a stipulation.
Right. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to stop you because this is where I want to correct you.
Yes.
Um
Go
okay.
ahead.
Um
Correct away.
so yes, so people do, I don't want to say try to slip in things. Sometimes honestly landlords are just unaware of honestly what even they can and cannot do. So a big clause, for example, is that I see a lot, like even this morning I submitted an offer for lease and I had to scratch it out. Is the tenant agrees to pay the first $100 of all repairs and the landlord will pay everything over and above that. That one is bullshit. The landlord has to pay everything. If something breaks, the landlord is 100% responsible for the repairs.
Unless you break it.
Unless you break it, like unless you like willfully or negligently break something, that's your responsibility. But anyway, that's an aside. But what I was going to say is it doesn't matter what the landlord tries to slip in there, even if that is in there and you signed it, it's still a bullshit clause that's not legal under the Residential Tenancies Act. So even
Right.
though it's in there and you sign your name to it, it's still not an enforceable clause. Your landlord cannot force you to pay that $100 or any of these other kind of gray area clauses that end up in your lease. The whatever you sign your name to, it doesn't supersede the law, basically.
Yes. However, my caveat to that is as long as you know. And
As long as you know.
if you don't know that it's not an enforceable thing, and you don't know that you can go to the landlord tenant board and fight it, 90% of the time you're going to end up doing what you've signed your name to because you simply just don't know better.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So you're right. It's not that it's like once you've signed it, the landlord tenant board will enforce it. It's the fact that once you've signed it, you're in your head, it's a done deal. And you might not know which of those clauses are things that aren't enforceable and that you could take to the landlord tenant board and say, this is bullshit. And and a lot of them too, like that $100, a lot of people, even if they know after the fact they find out, you're probably not going to want to go to the landlord tenant board for $100. It's a big bureaucratic crappy process for an amount of money that it's really easy to write off in your head. But if it just gets taken out ahead of time, then it's a non-starter. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Exactly. Yep. And honestly, a lot of the times it's just the fact that landlords don't know. Like,
Yeah, and
the
that's
number
it
of
too,
times,
right? It's maybe they're not trying to cheat you out of anything. It's just something that they saw somebody else do. They thought it was chill, and it didn't.
yeah,
Nobody told them that that's not true.
because the law is confusing for both landlords and tenants. Like, let's be honest. And you know, if a landlord is not being represented by an agent, then how are they going to be expected to read an act, like a legal act, and understand it, right? Like, this is policy,
Hmm.
it's law. So work with people who understand this, and if you don't, ask questions. Basically, there's lots of
Yeah.
resources that are out there. But yeah, that's what I want to say. You
Yes.
can't sign anything. You can't sign your name to something that is not law. That
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Or if you do, it's not suddenly legally enforceable.
Yeah,
That's the point. Which
that's
you're
the
right.
point.
Thank you for correcting me on that because that is a pretty important clarification.
And as I was saying, like, landlords sometimes just don't know. Like, sometimes, honestly, agents don't know. Like, I've explained this to agents before, being like, listen, this is not it's a bullshit clause under the Residential Tenancies Act. And they're like, oh, sorry, I don't do leases all the time. And I'm like, that's not a good excuse.
Yeah. Their
Sorry, it's
job.
industry, but it happens. So work with somebody who is familiar with leases, who does a lot of leases. And ask questions. Ask questions, know your rights. Read through the Ontario Standard Lease Agreement. I think that's actually where we started this tangent.
Yeah.
Is to read through the Ontario Standard Lease Agreement, because it does do a really good job of explaining what your rights are and everything else like that. So, not gonna lie, it's an incredibly annoying document for us to fill out. And there's always conflict
Mhm.
over like whose job it is to fill out, like whether it's the listing agents or if it's the tenant's agent's responsibility to fill that document out. Most of that goes on behind the scenes that you don't necessarily hear about, but those debates happen often. So to be honest, it's a very irritating document for real estate agents, but it is a really good one.
Yeah.
And I begrudgingly endorse it.
Good. That's good. We can't love everything
Of everything.
that's good for us, as
Yeah.
most people learned with food very young. Um
Fun fact,
anyway,
my sister and we are like go-to vegetable was broccoli and carrots. And I like carrots and she liked broccoli, but we hated it. So like when our parents weren't looking, we would just like switch. Like, she'd give me her carrots and I'd eat all carrots, and then I'd give her my broccoli and she'd eat all broccoli. And like, sometimes I think my parents had to have known.
they probably just didn't want to argue with you about it. They were like, whatever, they're getting some
At least
vegetables.
they're eating something. Yeah.
They're getting something that has vitamins in it. That's good. Oh, that's adorable though.
Those are the
It was
days.
like a really cute picture in my head of that dinner table. Anyway,
Anyway, so let's go over some of the notices. So, well, because honestly, we could go on for a really long time about this.
yeah, and we
probably
like
have
we said,
already.
we're gonna do another episode. Like the tenant leasing, renting stuff is not. It's
There's a
just as
lot.
big and complicated as buying and selling, and there's a lot to go over. So
Yeah.
this is we're dipping our toes.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
So let's the last two things that we'll kind of go over are deposits, because we briefly mentioned those, and notices. What notices you have to give. So we will start with notices. First things first. If you as a tenant want to move out, you have to give 60 days notice. When you sign a lease, I mentioned this at the beginning, when you sign a lease, you usually sign it for a 1-year term, which means that you are, I want to say stuck in that place for a year. So I'm just gonna go with, I'll go with into subletting and assignments in a minute, but
Yeah, there are ways to break it, but
there are ways
generally
to break, but
speaking,
generally
you're
speaking,
signing for
yeah, you're signing a lease for a year. If at the end of that year you want to move out, you have to give, so you sign a lease on June 1st, you want to move out the following June 1st, you have to give 60 days notice. So that would be April? April
1st.
1st. April to May, May to June.
Oh my God.
It's so weird, honestly, because my brain is often thinking, in like, I do a lot of leases as well as a lot of work with buyers and sellers, but so my brain is like often thinking like 2 months in advance. So like my head's in December in October, because in
Yeah.
October 1st, that's when December 1st leases come out. So I have to like get in touch with like all those anyway, realtor problems.
Yeah, we have a system now. I put reminders in the calendar. Sometimes I really fuck them up because I have a really hard time with the math. But sometimes they're fine, and that's great. And I'm gonna get better at it, I promise.
Anyway, notices. So if you a tenant, you want to move out, you have to give 60 days notice. Okay. So if your lease is ending June 1st, you have to give 60 days notice. It's April 1st. For landlords who want to increase their rent, you can do this once a year. A lot of people usually do it on the anniversary of the lease. That just makes sense for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Landlords can do it once a year, and they have to give you 90 days notice. So if you moved in on June 1st, what's the month before April?
March.
March 1st, they have to give you notice that your rent is going to be increasing for June 1st. Okay. So
Yes.
60 days notice if you want to move out, 90 days notice if your landlord is increasing your rent. Okay. In the 60-day notice period, if you've given notice that you want to move out, in that 60-day period, your landlord has the right to show your unit. Okay. They have to give you notice.
24 hours, at least
No,
24. No.
when you're in that so throughout the entire term of your lease, if your landlord or anybody of your landlord's representatives, repairmen, anything like that, need to come in, they have to give you 24 hours notice, unless it's like an emergency situation kind of thing. Once you have given notice, actually a lot of people don't know this, a lot of landlords don't know this, and a lot of agents don't know this. Once you have given notice in that 60-day period, a landlord does not need to give you 24 hours notice to show the property to prospective tenants. Okay.
Right. Okay, that's true. They need to reasonably attempt to get in touch with you to let you
Yes.
know.
They have to give you notice. They have to do everything that they possibly can to give you notice, even if that means just going to your house and like sticking a like piece of paper on your door. Because honestly, sometimes that happens. Sometimes tenants are shitty. But anyway, in that 60-day notice period, after you've given notice that you're moving out, your landlord does not need to give you 24 hours notice that they are showing prospective tenants. Pretty sure this is the only way that they don't need to give the notice. Like if you need something fixed, they would still have to give you the 24 hours notice for that. But yeah, if they want to show the property to somebody, then they don't need to give you that notice. That's a very little known fact in the industry, to be honest.
And a helpful thing to know.
And a helpful thing to know, to be honest. It's more helpful, I think, for landlords than it is for tenants, but it is also helpful for tenants because,
It can be difficult to adjust your life to people coming in and out of your house all the time.
Yeah, for sure. So be aware of that. 60 days, 90 days notice. Those are the big ones.
Once your 1-year lease term is up, the OSL that you've signed, my understanding is from that point forward, it doesn't mean that you have to leave.
It does not mean you have
right?
to leave. No.
But it does mean that from that point forward, you're on a month to month.
Correct. And you do not, two important things here. One, you do not need to give notice that you're going to stay on. I mean, it's a courtesy, and I think everybody absolutely should. But if your landlord does not receive notice 60 days in advance, they can't all of a sudden just list your property. Okay. They have to receive written notice from you saying that you're moving out. If they do not receive that notice, then on the anniversary of your lease term, you automatically default to a month-to-month lease, which means that you only have to give 60 days notice. So if you moved in on June 1st and you signed a 1-year lease, you moved in June 1st, 2019. Now we're at June 1st, 2020. I don't know why I said June, but anyway.
Whatever. It works. Keep it
works.
consistent.
So now we're at June 1st, 2020. Now you're on a month-to-month lease. You don't have to wait until the following June to give notice to move out. You can move out at any point with 60 days notice.
Yeah, exactly. So because the year thing has come up.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you do always, regardless of whether you're on a year lease or a month to month, you always have to give 60 days. That is the minimum amount that is required. And again, like that doesn't mean that people don't do less than that, but that's something that you have to work out with your landlord.
Yeah.
So that is what is required of you by law. If you have a conversation with your landlord and they're okay with 30 days instead, that's great. That's fine. Whatever you work out between the two of you is acceptable, but you have to assume that they need at least 60 days
Legally,
and not
60
go
days.
into it.
Yeah, legally 60 days is required. So that's honestly just your best bet. It's just to go with the 60 days. The fun thing about giving your 60 days notice is that if you give your 60 days notice on, what do we say, April 1st, that means for May, your rent is already paid. Okay. So
right, because that's your last month's rent.
Because that's
so
your
you
last
don't
month
have to pay anymore. Right.
Exactly.
Oh, so fun.
But important thing. Okay. If you continue to stay on, so say you're planning to stay on past June, that means you do have to pay May's rent, okay?
Because it's not your last month.
Because it is not your last month's rent. Your last month's rent applies to your true last month's rent, okay? Not the last month of the original term that you signed, the last month of your true last month's rent. And the other thing, if your rent increases, so say you are in your rental for 3 years and you have 2 rental increases over the 3 years that you're there, your landlord can ask you to top up your deposit.
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't know that.
Yeah. Many don't. Most don't. Especially because the majority of buildings in Toronto fall under rent control. So like the increase is like,
Minimal.
less than $50 usually. But your landlord is allowed to ask you to top up your deposit.
Good to know. Okay, I think that's the notices bit. So maybe to close out this episode, just because you mentioned it, can you just give us like a really quick explanation of the rent control that exists in Toronto?
Oh, right. Okay.
Because that's a thing.
Yeah, that is a thing. I will just say briefly on deposits. The only deposit that is legally allowed to ask of you is the last month's rent deposit, and a refundable. It has to be refundable key deposit, okay? And the key deposit cannot be more than the replacement value of your keys. So if your landlord is asking you for like $1,000 key deposit, ask them why. Check those receipts, okay? You can go to the concierge or call the property manager and find out how much like the key fob is, the keys are, those replacement values. I mean, this would be like, if it's $1,000, anywhere between kind of like $250 to $500, I would say is like an quote unquote average. More than that, I might start asking some questions. But those are the only 2 deposits that are allowed. So if, pet deposits, other damage deposits, all of those are bullshit. Okay. So, and that is all explained in the OSL. So it's
read it,
as we said. Rent control.
Yeah. Take a deep breath. Everybody listening, just everybody, let's all take a deep breath.
Okay, so rent control apply. We're talking about Toronto here because they're different rent control. Oh no, it's Ontario, right? Yeah, it's Ontario.
I think it's Ontario.
Yep. So we're talking about Ontario here. Rent control applies differently to different places. Find out if there's rent control in your area, because to be honest, rent control existed in Toronto for the entirety of my working real estate career in Toronto, but I actually didn't know that up until about 4 years ago. Okay. So the first iteration of it was like buildings that were built from, I think, anything from 1999 and earlier was under rent control. And honestly, the majority of people like we had a condo boom in the 2010. So that's when most of the big condos were built. So that's kind of where most people transitioned, and there was no rent control under there for a while. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, almost, legislation came into Ontario that said any building occupied up until now falls under rent control. Okay. Kathleen Wynne originally introduced this. She said it was kind of like a blanket policy. Everything is now under rent control. So basically what Kathleen Wynne said was everything's under rent control. Everything is under a guideline, because what was happening was like landlords were increasing rents by like $500,000 because or $500 a month because the market was going up so much. They were trying to like kick out tenants that were paying low amounts of rent to like get higher market values and stuff like that. So that's why
It's really shitty and sad.
It was really shitty and sad. It was terrible. So that's why rent control was introduced. It was a blanket policy. And the Ontario government was going to give you a guideline for how much you could increase your rent per year. Usually it was the amount of inflation. So for the past couple of years, it was like 1.8, 1.9. This year it's 2.2%. And actually for 2021, there's a rental freeze. What gives everybody a rent control headache now is that when Doug Ford came in, he got rid of rent control. So he said that from this date forward, anything that is built that has not been occupied prior to today will not fall under rent control.
And for the record, guys, it was November 15th, 2018. So any buildings that were built and not occupied prior to November 15th, 2018 are under rent control. Anything that was built and not occupied, or any building that existed before November 15th, 2018 is rent controlled. Anything that was built and wasn't occupied after November 15th, 2018 is not under rent control. So the newest buildings in Toronto do not have rent control.
Do not fall under rent control. But if you take a look at the wording of that, and this is getting into a little bit of pre-construction territory, but the wording of it says occupied.
Mm-hmm.
And when a new building is going up, there are two very distinct stages in its lifetime. The first is the occupancy period, where the building is finished enough that people are allowed to start moving in. It's still under ownership of the builder at this point, of the developer at this point. The second stage is when it actually registers with the city and all of the deeds are the ownership is transferred over to everybody who bought a unit in that place. Okay. The way of the wording is that anything that was occupied before November 15th, 2018, not registered. So between the occupancy period and the registry period, it could be, 3 to 6 months to a year. So anything that was kind of registered, after November 18th, 15th. Up until,
November 15th, 2018.
No, thank you. November 15th, 2018, up until pretty much a year after that, you kind of have to figure out when the fuck the occupancy period was, which is not like the registry period. The date that the building gets registered with the city is public knowledge. It's on public records. The date that it was occupied is not. So it's harder to find out.
Ugh.
And I also saw, I don't think that this is a real thing. I think it's building specific, but I also saw somebody say recently that they actually thought it was unit specific. So if the unit itself was occupied, which just throws things into like a whole other fucking kettle of fish. Like there's no way that,
oh my God.
Yeah. So like instead of like knowing the information for one building, like if there's 250 units in a building, you have to know the occupancy date for 250 units. Like that's not real. But if you live in a, I'm getting hot and sweaty over rent control, guys. It's like a real thing. So this is especially relevant in the age of COVID because rents came down so much, guys. Okay. In the last like 6 months. Okay. And I'm talking like, $300 to $500 or more. People are, clients of mine are getting $600 discounts left, right, and center. Like, it's nuts how much rental prices have come down. So and don't kid yourself, those prices are going to go back up. Okay. We now have a vaccine. We now have a president in the United States who's not batshit crazy. The border is going to open up. students are going to come back. Downtown is going to come back alive. Like, give it a year, guys, and things are going to be back to normal. So all of those buildings that were rented during COVID times under COVID prices that are not rent controlled, your rents can go up to market value
Like
and
practically overnight.
and there's no protection for you. So
yeah, that's what this means is that if you are a renter, particularly looking at condos, for everything, but like particularly looking at condos because condos are hard enough to understand anyway.
ask
And
about rent control.
ask about rent control. If you find a unit and you love it and the price is right and it's never been right before because the increase or the decreases have been so massive, before you sign that lease, have your ask your agent, or hopefully your agent is on top of it and is going to check anyway. Is this building rent controlled or not?
Yeah.
Because if it is, what that means is when things do go back to normal, you're still protected.
Yeah, the low level of rents that you're paying will maintain, because the maximum that your landlord will ever be able to increase your rent will be the amount of inflation, which is around 2%. If you're not protected, you might be fucked.
Yeah.
Now, everybody remember that for 2021, there is a rent freeze in Ontario. So nobody's rents can go up in 2021 at all. There is a rent freeze across the board, okay? But for 2022, when we for sure will be back to normal, those rental prices will be going up.
Yeah. So this is a major pro tip. And if you're listening to this and it doesn't apply to you because you have an apartment you love and you're not going anywhere, or you own your property or whatever it is, like, tell a friend.
Yeah.
Tell a friend, because that's the kind of thing, like, that can be life ruining.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
And you know, for your $1,400 studio to go back to $2,000 a month, that's not a rent increase that pretty much anybody is going to be able to sustain.
Yeah.
So, and do not doubt that it will happen if it's possible, because people want their money back. So
yeah, for sure.
just, keep it in mind if it applies to you. And if it doesn't apply to you, tell a freaking friend.
Yeah. And if you don't feel comfortable telling a friend, refer them to this podcast.
Yeah, tell them to listen to us. We'll tell them. Yay. Yeah. So, I think we should probably put a pin in it, because this got long and heated, and with good reason. There were lots of really important things to cover here.
Yeah, for sure.
As we said, we're going to do more episodes on renting. Please, if there are any specific questions that you have about this, let us know. Like, we will answer, we will do the research and let you know.
Yeah.
We want to help. And this is fucking confusing.
Yeah. And I already know one big thing that we're going to talk about next time is we'll get more into the eviction process, like when your landlord can give you notice, when they're moving in, when they're selling the unit, all of that stuff that happens. So that's a big topic on itself, and we'll get into that first in our next episode. We'll call this episode Renting 101, and we'll call our next episode Renting 102.
Yeah, there you go. It's like school, except you didn't pay for it and you don't get a degree.
You get a degree in renting, but I think the ultimate takeaway should be to work with somebody.
Yeah. I mean, should we make certificates for people who let us know that they listen to both?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. You'll get a graduation certificate. Post it on Instagram. Tell us that yeah. Oh my God. I'm so into that. Yeah. That's going to be adorable.
Me too. That sounds really fun.
All right. Yeah, so let's sign off before we babble some more.
We're so bad at that.
We love you. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. Please DM us. Let us know. ProperTea Podcast. You just give it all to us. There are no stupid questions.
All the things. Okay. Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to ProperTea Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on all of the platforms.
And remember, if you have any questions about anything we've discussed on the podcast, or you want us to discuss, DM us on our Instagram at ProperTea Podcast. That's ProperTea Podcast.
See you next time. Bye.